have spent virtually my entire professional career taking care of children and looking out for their welfare. And it became very apparent that we were not looking out for their welfare in the direction that this country was taking. And that clearly all of us are going to have to become much more vigilant in the way that we are governed. And this country was supposed to be of, for, and by the people. And somehow it's gotten confused and it believes it's of, for, and by the government. But I believe that it's time for the people to take it back. You know, I'm delighted that we're here in a high school where the mascot is Patriots. But you know, I think back to high school. It was a long time ago for me. But I remember one of the things that was so vivid is that there were the cool guys and there were the nerds. Remember that? I mean, you could always tell the cool guys because they had the latest fashions, and you know, they knew all the tunes on the radio, and you know, they had a car and 3 chicks on each arm. I mean, they were so cool. And then there was the nerd, you know, standard grade A nerd with the high water pants, you know, the big thick glasses and the books, and none of the girls wanted to be seen talking to him in public. But you know, a funny thing happens. A few years go by, and it's time to graduate. And the cool guy gets a job flipping burgers. The nerd has gotten a scholarship to the University of Virginia. A few more years go by. The cool guy, he's still flipping burgers, but he's cool. The nerd is graduating from college, signs a Fortune 500 contract with a big signing bonus. First stop, goes to the eye doctor, gets LASIK done. Next stop, goes to the car dealer, gets a nice Lexus, goes to the tailor, gets some nice suits, and now all the girls are saying, "Don't I know you?" Don't want to talk to the guy flipping burgers, but you know, what am I talking about? I'm talking about delayed gratification. Such an important concept. And one of the problems that we face in this nation today is that so many people have this instant gratification mentality. I gotta have it now. And that is fed frequently, you know, by the media. But I'll tell you a secret, as a neuroscientist, we have these real sophisticated brains for a reason, with these big frontal lobes. If you look at a human brain versus another creature, you'll notice the difference. People have these big frontal lobes. Why? Because we engage in rational thought processing. We can extract information from the past and the present, analyze it, and project it into the future, which means we have the ability to plan and strategize our lives. A year ahead, 5 years ahead, 10 years, 15, 20 years. Whereas animals just have a tendency to react to what's ever going on. The problem is, we have a lot of people who act like animals. They just react to what's going on instead of planning and strategizing. And this is what we in America must once again start doing. Planning and strategizing, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to salvage the future for our young people. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I can tell you that things do not look good for our country right now. This is an incredible nation. When you stop and you think about it, thousands of years before this nation came on the scene, people did things the same way. Within 200 years of America coming on the scene, men were walking on the moon. It changed the complete complexion of humanity on this planet. We are very exceptional. There's no question about it. And what we have to do is make sure that we remain exceptional, and we cannot be exceptional if we're willing to give away all of our values and principles for the sake of political correctness. That won't do it. People want us to be like everybody else, but we're not like everybody else. Have you ever noticed that there's such a thing as the American way? There is no French way. There is no Portuguese way, no Nigerian way. There's just an American way. And it's something that we need to be proud of, and we certainly don't need anybody to come in here and try to change who we are. That's not about America. We welcome people. We welcome people from all parts of the earth. But we welcome them, as Teddy Roosevelt said over 100 years ago, we welcome them with open arms, but only if they're willing to assimilate into American culture. We also, we must really begin to emphasize once again one of the things that led us so quickly to the pinnacle of the world, and that is our education. You know, it was when Alexis de Tocqueville came here in 1831 to study America, because the British and the French and all the Europeans were fascinated. How could a fledgling nation like America, barely 50 years old, already be competing with them on virtually every level? And he wanted to investigate and see what the heck was going on. And he studied our government, and he was very impressed with our divided government, the separation of powers, the efficiency of our government. Now, this was some time ago. And then he said, well, let me look at their educational system, and that's what really blew him away. Anybody finishing the second grade was completely literate. He could find a beaver trapper. The guy could read the newspaper, could tell him how the government worked, could have an intelligent conversation. Only the aristocracy in Europe could do that. And you know, it was the fact that our people were well educated and were able to work together that allowed us to move from one ocean to the other ocean across a rugged and hostile terrain. It was because our people knew how to build roads and structurally sound bridges and containment facilities and dams, and they knew how to invent things when a problem came up. And it was that can-do attitude that allowed them to so quickly rise to the pinnacle of the world. And that is why the can-do attitude must be returned, and we must get rid of the what can you do for me attitude. And, you know, when I was a youngster growing up, and you know, I had an opportunity, and I'm actually thankful for the fact that I had an opportunity to live at virtually every economic level in this country. from the very lowest rung to the very highest rung. And I must admit I like the highest rung better. But the fact of the matter is that the other parts are very helpful to you because, you know, I got an opportunity to see, to behold a lot of things. And one of the things that became very apparent to me is that people in the lower rungs of our society also have pride. And they don't want you to just pat them on the head and say, there, you poor little thing. I'm going to take care of all of your needs. What they would prefer you do in our situation today is fix the economy so that they can climb out of that lower rung and up into the higher rung. And that economy right now is in very, very bad shape. You know, you all heard about our big national debt, $18+ trillion. Now that's a ridiculous amount of money. We can say it, but can you even imagine what that means? I mean, $1 billion is a lot. $1 billion is 1,000 million, just 1 billion. And $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. I mean, it is absurd. If you tried to pay back our national debt, $18+ trillion, at a rate of $10 million a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it would take you over 5,000 years. And that's what we're putting on the backs of our young people. Now, that's the good news. Okay? Because it's actually much worse than that. If somebody came along today and wrote us a check for $18 trillion, you say, we're paying off your national debt, guess what? We would still be in huge trouble. Because there's something known as the fiscal gap. Please look that up when you go home tonight, the fiscal gap. That is the unfunded liabilities that we owe as a government. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the governmental programs, all the government agencies. You know there are 645 government agencies and sub-agencies. Big price tags associated, all that. And versus the money that we expect to take in from taxes and other revenue sources. If we were fiscally sound, those two numbers should be close to the same. But when we're not, a gap develops. We bring that forward to today's numbers, and that's what's called the fiscal gap. Now, this is not something that you will hear any traditional politicians talking about. But I'm not a politician, so I can talk about it. Okay? And our fiscal gap right now sits at over $200 trillion. And guess what? Somebody has to pay that off. You guess who that is? Us and our children and our grandchildren and many generations beyond that. We are spending up everything. It is a house of cards. It's going to collapse. You know, I mentioned the fiscal gap in my announcement speech back in Detroit in May. And the next day, the liberal media, as expected, came out and said, oh, I told you he was crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's an idiot savant. He only knows about neurosurgery. He didn't know anything about economics. And then the very next day, Forbes came out with an article that said 17 Nobel laureates in economics and 1,200 professors of economics agree with Carson. I think that took some of the wind out of their sails, but you know, the fact of the matter is, the only reason that we can sustain that level of debt is because we can print money. And why can we print money? Because we are known as the reserve currency of the world. We're the only ones, by the way, who can do that. It's a position that generally goes with the #1 economy in the world, which we have been since the 1870s, which is amazing when you stop and think about it. You know, we declared our independence in 1776, and in less than 100 years, we're the #1 economic power in the world. That is an amazing feat. Nobody else has ever done anything like that. But last year, we went into competition with China for that spot. Some people say China's #1 now, some people say we are, but it's neck and neck. Here's the point. We may soon lose our ability to be the reserve currency. Now, what would happen if we could not print money, which we are doing very irresponsibly, by the way, which we have been doing irresponsibly since 1971 when we decoupled the dollar from the gold standard. It's just our good name, faith, and credit now. And that's not very good. And that's what we're basing it on. So you can see a collapse could happen at any time. And there are many other countries that are interested in changing the reserve currency. That means we need to get our act together. We cannot just continue doing this. And you know, when somebody comes along and says, hey, America, everything's wonderful, and how about free college for everybody? Well, when you know what the fiscal gap is, your correct response is laughing and saying, what are you talking about? How in the world are you going to pay for this when we are already about to go off the financial cliff? Because you see, there are people who just take advantage of the fact that people are not knowledgeable. And therefore, you know, they'll come along and say something like, oh, unemployment is wonderful. We're down to like 5.1%, which is essentially full employment. But of course, knowledgeable people know that you can make that number anything you want based on who you include and who you exclude. And that the real number is the labor force participation rate, which is at its lowest ebb in 37 years. You know, that's what's really going on. And what we have to do is to make sure that we inform all the people of this country of what's going on, because that's the only way that they can make appropriate decisions. You know, it was Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin especially who talked about the importance of a well-educated and informed society. They said it was the basis of our freedom and our government. And they said if we ever became anything other than that, the nature of our country would rapidly change. Why? Because if the people were not well informed, all it would take was a dishonest politician and dishonest media to feed people a bunch of lies, and off they would go into another direction. And that's exactly what has been happening in our country. And it's not because people are bad people, it's just that they've been misinformed. And we all have a job to help change that, which I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes. But I never like to bring up a problem without offering a solution. And we can actually fix this. This is eminently fixable. You can't cut your way out of this. But this country possesses the most powerful economic engine the world has ever known. And the problem is it's being chained down by regulations. We have a gazillion regulations in every aspect of our lives. It was never meant for the government to be in all aspects of our lives trying to control everything. And this is a large problem, but let me tell you what happens with regulations. Every time you pass a regulation, it costs money. It's like a tax. It costs money to the consumer because, you know, the producer has to incorporate that cost into the cost of the product or service. So everybody gets to pay it, but who is most adversely affected by it? Poor people and middle class people. They're the ones who get hit the most. The rich it doesn't bother them nearly as much. That's one of the things that's driving the income gap, all the regulations. The Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clintons of the world will not tell you this. They will tell you that it's because of rich people. But let me tell you a secret. If you take all the money from the top 1% and apply it to our financial problems, you will barely make a dent in it. That is not what is causing the problem. And we got to get rid of some of all of those regulations. And when I say that, I recognize that we need some regulations. Our founders said that if men were angels, no government or regulation would be necessary. But men are not angels, nor are women. Just in case there are any Hillary supporters here. Okay. But, you know, we need appropriate kinds of regulations, but not over-regulation. That will help control pricing, and that will help quite a bit. But the other thing that is killing the middle class and the lower class is the fact that it's almost impossible for them to make any money anymore. It used to be that you would take your check every Friday and put 5% of it into your savings account and watch that grow over 20, 30, 40 years. And by the time you retired, you had a very nice nest egg. But now, for almost a decade now, the Fed has artificially suppressed those interest rates. And you can't make any money unless you go to the stock market. Well, who has the risk tolerance to put their money in the stock market? The rich do, not the middle class, not the lower classes. So the income gap grows even further. It's these asinine policies that is driving the income gap, not the fact that rich people have money. And what we're going to have to do is drive down the debt. Many economists will tell you when the debt to GDP ratio reaches 90, that's when you have great sluggishness in the economy. Our debt to GDP ratio right now is at 103. And so it's in a very, very bad place. We need to drive that debt down very significantly. And how do we do that? Now, this is something this number is actually manageable. People will tell you that it's not. The $200 trillion, that one, that's a little out there. But 18 trillion, we can do this. Now, one of the things we would need to do is stop adding to it. You know, we need to stop that right away, okay? It's sort of like when you learn the ABCs of resuscitation after someone's been badly injured. Stop the bleeding first. That's the first thing you have to do. So the government, all they have to do is declare a moratorium on raising the federal budget. We don't raise it 1 penny for 3 or 4 years and the budget will be balanced, just like that. That's how easy it is to actually balance the budget. But that's only step one. There are thousands of federal employees that retire every year. Don't replace them. Just do that for 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 years, and you're down to a reasonable level. And then, with all those agencies that I just talked about, and sub-agencies, 645, in a Carson administration, we would bring all of those people in, and we would say, over the next year, I want you to cut your budget by 3 to 4%. Anybody who tells me you can't do that, give me your resignation right now, because I tell you, it's there. Now you're starting to talk about some real fiscal responsibility. it makes all the difference in the world. You know, I learned about fiscal responsibility from my mother, who only had a third grade education. You know, was one of 24 children, got married when she was 13, but she was very thrifty. She would go to the Goodwill and she would buy a pair of trousers with a big hole in the knee, back before that was fashionable, and buy a couple of patches and put them on there, and people would be saying, "Where'd you get those? I want a pair like that." And she would take us out in the country on a Sunday morning, and we would knock on farmers' doors, and she would say, "Can we pick 4 bushels of your corn or your apples or your beans or your grapes? 3 for you and 1 for us." They always loved that ideal. She would bring the stuff home and can it, and she would drive a car. She would drive a car. She would drive a car until it wouldn't make a sound. And then she would gather up all her pennies and nickels and dimes and quarters and dollars and go and buy a new car. People would say, "How can that woman afford a new car?" But see, it was her philosophy that you don't buy a used car, because if it was a good car, they would still have it. So, and you know, I really do think that with her third grade education, if my mother were the Secretary of the Treasury, we would not be in a deficit situation. Because, you know, what it really takes is common sense. You know, this stuff about spending your way out of a deficit, that's not common sense. That's idiocy. You know, I don't know where that kind of stuff comes from. And this stuff about too big to fail, give me a break. You know, if you're stupid, you need to fail. That's all there is to it. But, you know, we have a problem when the government starts picking the winners and the losers. And, you know, that's one of the reasons that I think some of our government agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency, need to be revamped, okay? And what they need to understand is that their mission should be to work with all of the businesses and industries to find the cleanest, most environmentally friendly ways to do things, rather than how you shut things down. You know, we have enormous energy resources within this country, enormous, and yet we have archaic energy exportation rules that were put in place in the 70s when we did have an energy crisis. Well, that's just craziness. We don't have that anymore. We need to get rid of those so that we can develop our energy and then export it. Like, we have so much natural gas, it'll last for the next 1,000 years. And we know how to liquefy it now, which means we can export it, and we can make Europe dependent on us for energy instead of Putin, and put them back in his little box. As an added bonus, that's going to be driving down our debt. That's what we need to, you know, simple things like the Keystone Pipeline. You know, that's a simple thing. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but the problem is we have a governmental structure that works for its ideological goals rather than for the good of the people of the United States. And that's what we have to change. The other thing that will help us economically is we have the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. And of course that's going to drive businesses out of here. That's common sense. We have a Secretary of the Treasury who says that American companies that do business overseas to avoid our high tax rates are unpatriotic. What does that tell you about the people running our country? They don't understand business. People don't go into business to support the government. They go into business to make money. You know, it's business. A smart government will create an environment that's conducive to the success of businesses, that will draw business in here rather than repel business, and that will make a lot more money for them. The other thing we need to do is have a tax. Back to the corporate tax. If we lower that rate, I would lower it lower than the average so it begins to have a magnetic effect. But before doing that, I would actually declare a 6-month tax holiday in corporate taxes so that over $2 trillion that's sitting overseas can be repatriated to this country without costing the taxpayers one penny. And the only stipulation would be that 10% of that money would have to be used to create jobs for unemployed people and people on welfare. That would be an amazing stimulus for our country. It also gets business and industry, academia, Wall Street, and the churches and groups start thinking once again the way we used to. We used to think that it was our responsibility to take care of the indigent people among us. And then in the 60s, it really started really more like in the 30s. It started really with Wilson, but it really got bad in the 60s. The war on poverty with Johnson, and the government decided to take over and everybody else kind of backed off. And the government has spent $19 trillion on this war on poverty. Have they won? I don't think so. You know, we now have 10 times more people on food stamps, more people on welfare, more poverty, more broken homes, more out-of-wedlock birth, more crime, more incarceration. Everything that was supposed to be better is not only worse, it's much worse. And that's what happens because it was never the government's job to do that. They need to read the Constitution. It is our job to do that. Our job, people. And we, quite frankly, can do a much better job because that's when relationships develop. And it's the relationships that really will pull people out of that situation. You know, some people have complained about me. They said, well, Carson grew up in poverty. He must have benefited from some government programs, and now he wants to withdraw all the safety nets from people, which is a bold-faced lie. That's all it is. It's just a lie because they have to demonize you. They have to find some kind of way to tell lies about you. I have no desire to withdraw safety nets from people who need them, but I do have a strong desire to provide a ladder which will allow people to climb out of dependency and become part of the fabric of our nation. And then, of course, we need to have a tax system that is truly fair and that is very simple. The simpler, the fairer, and it needs to affect everybody, but it needs to affect them in a proportionate way. And, you know, I like to use the example of a 10% tax, but it may not be 10%. It could be as high as 15, or it could be the fair tax. But the fact of the matter is, a guy makes $10 billion, he pays $1 billion. A guy makes $10, he pays $1. And they get the same rights and privileges. What could be more fair than that? You have to get rid of all the loopholes, all the deductions, but it makes it very fair. And some people say, that's not fair, because the guy who made $10 billion, he's still got $9 billion left. We need to take more of his money. That's called socialism. That does not get us where we need to be. One of the things that made us great was the fact that we said, that guy who just put in $1 billion, we need to make the environment even better for him so that next year he can make $20 billion and put in $2 billion. Okay, that's what made us grow. You'll never grow by just taking and dividing and redistributing. That is not who we are as Americans. But we do want everybody to succeed, and we do want to create an environment where everybody can do that. And if we stop playing favorites, there's no question that we can do that. The other thing that is so important when I think about our children is their security. And we're not doing a whole lot. We're not thinking forward on this. You know, our electrical grid is in pathetic condition, and we need a public-private cooperation to get that grid hardened, and we got to do it very quickly. And we need several layers of protection for our energy, because it would be so easy for that to be disturbed through a cyber attack or through exploding a nuclear weapon in our exo-atmosphere. There are a number of things that should be done. We need to be thinking about that now. We need to have really spiffed up cyber capabilities. And when somebody attacks us, we need to hit them so hard they won't ever think about doing it again. And we also need to get back into space. Not because I want men walking on Mars, but remember, it was the space program that provided so many of the inventions that we all benefit from, like your cell phone. Your cell phone came from the space program. And here's what's most important. In the future, he who controls space controls the earth. We cannot lag behind in this and let others get the advantage. We simply can't do it. And we really need to spiff up the research that we're doing in terms of our military capabilities. We have allowed our military to become very weakened. Our Navy is very small. Our Air Force is very small. We have so many people retiring who are unhappy. The morale is very low. We have 22 to 23 veterans committing suicide every day in America. And this shows that we do not have adequate support for them. What we should do is, as soon as somebody enlists in the military, they also should enlist in a support program that follows them all the way through their career, and a year before their discharge gets them integrated back into society. And not only that, but all of our veterans should have a health savings account sponsored by our government, which allows them to go to any medical facility in the country, and we ought to be happy to take care of them. And as far as ISIS and the global jihadists are concerned, you know, we need to recognize, I hear some people saying, we don't want to make that mistake again. You know, in 2003, we went over there, we invaded, and, you know, we lost a lot of people, and we lost a lot of money, and we need to learn from our mistakes. Guess what? This is a very different situation than that. We are now talking about our existence. They want to destroy us. And they are recruiting because they look like they're very successful. Now, we have the ability to stop them from looking successful if we would just let our military do its job. And it's a matter of us using every facility available to us, economic and military. But basically, we either let them destroy us or we destroy them. And I like the latter better. Now, what we have to think about I'm just scratching the surface. There's so many things that we could be talking about. But I will tell you this. In my many years as a physician, in the decades that I spent in corporate America, sitting on international corporate boards, starting a national scholarship program, and multiple other things, one thing that I have come to learn is that we are blessed in this country with some incredible talent, incredible minds in this country. And there is no one person who knows everything. There are some who think they know everything, but there is no one person. But you know, in Proverbs 11:14, it says, "In the multitude of counselors is safety." And we have some tremendous people. And one of the things that I'm going to do if there is a Carson administration is have a number of regional committees around the country, different parts of the country, and we're going to rotate the membership amongst regular Americans. And we're going to find out what they think, because the country is really for the people. It's not for the government. That's what we have to keep in mind. But I said I was going to have one assignment for everybody. Do you remember reading about the pre-revolutionary days in America? And the people were so tired of the tyranny of King George III, and they started having town meetings, and they would talk about what kind of America were they willing to fight for? What were they willing to die for? What would they pass on to their children? And they encouraged each other, and that's how a ragtag bunch of militiamen defeated the most powerful and professional military on earth. That's the kind of thing that can happen when people-to-people communication occurs. Everybody in here has a sphere of influence. And what I want you to do is promise that you will get 3 people who have tuned out to tune back in. You know, in 2012, 93 million people did not vote who could have voted. 30 million evangelicals did not vote. I want you to go out and get those people and get them involved. I don't even care if they don't vote for me. I just want them to be involved. I want them to be informed. I want you to go talk to your uncle who is an alcoholic and hasn't voted in 20 years, and tell him if he doesn't get his act together, there won't be any alcohol. I want you to, and I want you to go to the nursing home where your invalid aunt or grandmother is, and you make sure that they have an absentee ballot. And if they need you to help them fill it out, you help them fill it out. But we need to get as many people involved as possible, because I'm going to tell you a secret. The American people, for the most part, are actually pretty wise. They actually do have common sense, but they've been sort of beaten down over the course of time. And Thomas Jefferson said this would happen. And he said that the people would become less vigilant and would become discouraged. And the government would just grow and grow and insinuate itself into every part of our lives. But just before we turned into something else, the American people would awaken. And they would once again gain control. And I say, now is that time.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Candy Carson, and I approve this message.
Now, We have time for a few questions, and I think we have a microphone right here.